Hello and welcome to Jackanory. But it's a slightly different Jackanory today because, as you can see, there's a whole group of us here. And what we're going to do is we're going to invent a story. I shall start off with the story and then I will pass it on to whoever. And here is my story. Philippa and Camilla were sisters. They were playing in a small back garden in the middle of a very large town. Philippa was playing with a doll's house that had been given to her by her favourite uncle. He wore a grey suit and did something in the city. What he did in the city, she had no idea, and she didn't mind as long as it wasn't yucky. Camilla was playing with a toy concrete mixer that had been given to her by her favourite aunt, who wore a caftan dress, sat cross-legged and hummed. They were playing very happily when suddenly they heard a sound. And they looked up, and there in the sky they saw a balloon. Now, it wasn't a balloon that might have escaped from a party, nor was it a balloon that had a label attached to it with a name and address that goes to the far-flung places where balloons go to be found and sent back home again. No, this was a hot air balloon. Attached to it was a basket, and it was way up in the blue sky, and there were some clouds as well floating round about it. Well, the children ran around excitedly like little puppies, bumping into each other, and they fell over. Camilla's bum fell on the ground and it hurt, whereas Philippa's was soft, and so she bounced back up again. The thing was, the balloon got bigger and bigger, but it was coming nearer and nearer, so they ran and hid behind a bush, and then the balloon landed in the garden. Lynda.
Well, out of this balloon came the most extraordinary little man you've ever seen, because it looked empty, you see, because he was so little, he was inside the basket. Philippa, who was always a polite girl, always very polite, rather creepy actually, she was, ran up and went, "How do you do? My name's Philippa." Camilla, you know, with the concrete mixer, got on her concrete mixer. Well, it was like a concrete mixer at the front, but then like one of those forklifts at the back, one was on wheels. Got on it, thinking maybe this little man could, in fact, be dangerous, and she came trundling across. The little man was a little scared and hung on to the rope that held the balloon. Strange, actually, because he was such a tiny little man, it was extraordinary that he could hang on to this balloon, which was absolutely huge.
But the man made them an offer which they couldn't refuse. He said the balloon was a magic balloon, and because they'd been good girls, they could take the balloon and go for a ride to any place they wanted. Oh, yeah. So they thought for a moment. Philippa and Camilla looked at each other. They decided to take the doll's house and the concrete mixer with them, just in case they came in useful. And they got into the balloon, and the little man let go of the rope and waved them goodbye as they went up into the air. And as they went up into the air, they could see the garden and the house below them getting smaller and smaller, and they could see all the...
Vicky?
And they could see all the little cars and all the little buses, like little toys in the street, and they saw their grumpy old neighbour, Mr. Bones. He was doing his shopping over there, and they were waving furiously. And suddenly, all these people started looking up and pointing at them and going, "Oh," like this. Except they couldn't really hear what they were saying, but they knew there was an awful lot of pointing and shouting and pointing and shouting and waving about. And Mr. Bones was leaping about with his shopping and nearly spilt all his shopping all over the floor. Very worrying. And Philippa and Camilla looked at each other and thought, well, I mean, surely people have seen a hot air balloon before. Why are they...
Nick?
And Philippa was getting a bit worried because they were getting higher and higher and higher, and she said, well, this is all very well, but how are we going to get the balloon to come down again? Camilla said, well, it's lucky I bought the concrete mixer, because all I have to do is mix up concrete, and obviously it will be very heavy, and that weight will bring the balloon down. So she started mixing it up and putting it into buckets, because there were little buckets, little sand buckets around the balloon, and she filled them up, and the balloon started slowly coming down and down and down. But when it got down near the earth, it didn't look like anywhere that they'd ever seen or anywhere they'd ever been before.
Jim?
It looked completely different. It wasn't their little garden at all, no. This place was covered in snow. There was snow everywhere. No, there was, really. There was snow all over the place. They were a bit worried, but they as it landed, they got out and they looked around. There didn't seem to be anything there at all. But they could hear way off in the distance this ho, 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 ho. And they thought, I know who that is. I bet that's Santa Claus. Don't be ridiculous, said Camilla, picking up her concrete mixer. But they trudged off through the snow, looking around. They were a little bit scared, but they felt quite safe. They got...
Angela?
They got the impression that it was Santa Claus, but actually it was a yeti. And it was standing in this huge doorway of snow, this huge, like an igloo. And it was standing like this, tapping its fingers. Yeah? What do you want? Okay? And there was Camilla and Philippa, a bit confused, a bit worried, and because the yeti couldn't quite hear, Camilla had to make more cement to make steps so they could climb up these steps to get nearer to this yeti and sort of say, "Who are you?"
Sylvester. My name is Hetty the Yeti. Welcome to my abode. And so the two children went up and into Hetty's house. Now, Hetty was an interesting place. It was all yetified. There was yeti chairs and yeti televisions and yeti. There was a yeti mirror on the wall.
Please.
Yes. And yeti, there's more. And they looked into the mirror. And what did they see? They saw themselves vaguely, only they looked ever so yeti. This worried them a bit. And they turned to Hetty and said, "Do we actually look like that?" And Hetty said, "No, not at all. Everyone who looks in that mirror looks like that. But everyone who I look at looks like you." So, Vicky.
They thought, well, this is a very confusing state of affairs, because if we don't look like that, why are our hands big and hairy suddenly? And she looked down, and sure enough, their hands were getting bigger and hairier by the minute. And they were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and suddenly they realised they were looking at Hetty face to face. And Hetty said, "Well, in all my years as a yeti, I've never known this happen to anyone." And Philippa, who, as you know, was a bit spoiled and a bit sort of, she suddenly started crying and went, "Oh, no one...
Richard.
What am I going to do?" She continued. Well, the yeti had an idea. He felt that if the two children were turning into yetis, then maybe she, Hetty, would be turning into a normal person. And that was right, because the hair on her hands started to disappear, and she got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and so small that she was the same size as the dolls in the doll's house.
Very good.
Lynda.
Yes, and may I add to this also, not only was she as small as the little dolls in the doll's house, she was as small as the little green man who'd been left back in Philippa and Camilla's garden.
the thick
holding the
plottings.
balloons. Yes, indeed it does. Suddenly Camilla, who was quite bright, as you know, who looked now down far away, she could see her cement mixer. This upset her more than anything. Her cement mixer was now far too small for her to do anything with. It was more like a thimble, like this. She went, "Well, just a minute then. Just a minute." Yes, Philippa said, "Hurry up and give us an answer. I can't stand here all day." No, she said, "That means," and she looked at Hetty, "does that mean, Hetty, that somehow you sent that little green man off in that balloon because you wanted to get small so you could go off?" Hetty said, "Yes."
Angela.
And they were then very, very worried, because if they went back to Mum and Dad and they were this big, and Mum and Dad were only that big, I mean, we're talking big scare time, you know what I'm saying? And so they were really thinking, well, there must be some way to reverse this. And the secret, I think, said Camilla, exceptionally bright, very bright girl, is to look into the mirror and imagine yourself as the other person. So they went back to the mirror, both of them. They thought, really?
Jim.
Hard about it. They really thought about the way they used to be before they were yetis. Although, to tell the truth, Philippa was actually starting to enjoy being yeti. And figured what point she'd score when she went back to school the next day. So she wasn't really thinking as hard as Camilla. Camilla, within an instant, was back to Camilla. But Philippa was still as a yeti and decided she wanted to go back like that anyway. So they agreed, fair enough. They all got back in the balloon with the little lady, and they all flew back. The balloon took off again, went higher and higher and higher till everything disappeared. And for a long time, they were in the clouds. They didn't know where they were going. Philippa didn't care, because she was admiring her hairy hands. Then they looked down. They could see their town below them. It got bigger and bigger as they came down, 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 and landed in the back garden. The little green man came up and met the little green woman. They both shook hands and hugged, got in the balloon, waved to Philippa, the yeti, and Camilla, who was standing beside her, who stopped crying now and starting to...
Lynda.
Be rather cheerful about the whole thing and, in fact, getting rather bossy and arrogant, Philippa, now. She said, "No, I can't go. I must go to school straight away." Camilla said, "Well, you're always like this, aren't you? Whinge and moan and grizzle, and then you come out on top. Why should you be the star of the show?" "Don't be like that." "No, don't be like that." She's rather huge now, isn't she? Hairy. So they set off down the road towards the local school. Well, of course, the teacher who'd been doing the roll call that day, when they'd taken the names, Philippa and Camilla were missing, so she'd already sent out out. Terrible problems. Where are they? What were they doing? Rung up the auntie, rung up the grey-suited uncle in the city, because they disappeared off the face of the earth. So the teacher and the head teacher, and all the teachers, in fact, of the school, were all standing in the playground looking for... Even the school porter was there. Where are they?
Where are they? And at that point, they walked through the gate. And the teachers immediately went up and said, "This is preposterous. Surely you know you're not allowed to bring pets to school with you." Particularly pets that are that size. I mean, they won't be able to control them at all. It's bad enough with the kids, let alone this. But at that moment, something very, very strange happened.
Sylvester. They had a teacher who taught, apart from many other things, hairdressing. Now, when this teacher came out and saw Camilla and Philippa together, she said to, is it Camilla? Yes? She said, "Camilla, your friend Philippa will help out with her hairy hands and a hairy head. Instead of having 3 pupils, I can only use 1. And so they brought her in and sat her down, and they cut this hair here, and they put rollers in this hand here, and they sprayed this one here, and all the children had a good time learning how to do hair ever so quickly using one person. So Philippa became incredibly popular, and Camilla got very, very upset. And so it was last seen playing with her concrete mixer as she built herself a little house to surround herself, and she sat in it wishing that she had stayed hairy like Philippa. And so that is the end of our story. So it's goodbye from myself, and it's goodbye from Vicky.
Goodbye.
Jim.
Goodbye.
Lynda.
Bye.
Richard.
Goodbye.
Angela.
Goodbye.
And Nick.
Bye.
There's another Past the Story on Friday afternoon at 4:05 on Children's BBC. Don't miss that. Also, don't miss Peter Pan and the Pirates. That's coming very, very soon. So is Newsround and Blue Peter